generation.
DJO, much appreciated, bro. Thank you for always setting the vibe.
Appreciate it.
Welcome everybody for, yeah, thank you, man. Welcome everybody for joining us with Dope People. Unprecedented times, and so we appreciate you joining here. We have a different kind of setup today. We don't have a one-on-one here. We have a full panel of really wise individuals from all different walks of life. So we're going to go around and say some names, but first I want to give it up to my co-host, Lulu Sway. Hey, Lulu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today.
Just to make sure that your video pops up on all the viewers' screens, will everybody say, just say your name and where you're at. Let's go with Jason.
Hi, everybody. It's Jason Starr. Happy to be here with On the Rebel again, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
David.
Hello, everybody. My name is David TRAN, and I'm here in Seattle, Washington. I'm happy
Nicole.
to be here.
Hi, I'm Nicole Graf, and I'm a co-owner of a cannabis company in Olympia, Washington.
Grizz.
Hello, everyone. Grizzly Bocourt, founder of CANNAWARE Society and a Rebel Mind Society here in New York.
Saki.
Hello, everyone. I'm Saki FENDERSON. I am also here in New York. We're a little New York deep, I see.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As always, you know, Lulu and I invite our friends and people we've met in our cannabis journey, normally talking about different elements of business and entrepreneurship. And this week, you know, we had Dave on deck, and we had a conversation with him that, you know, it didn't feel like the right time. There's a lot going on in the world, and we felt it was extremely important to bring different voices to the table, Black, white, Asian, Latino, to speak on what's going on, because it has an impact on all of us. So I want to open it up and you know, ask you, Jason, what's going on in Brooklyn? How are you? I know you're doing a lot. Why don't you start us off with what's going on in your world?
Sure. And I think it's appropriate to just to make sure we, you know, give honor and respect to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McJay, Nina Pop, the names, you know, the list is so innumerable, the pain that those families and communities feel. So I want us to make sure that we center ourselves in that experience and know that we are, you know, having this conversation in memory and in respect to, you know, all the lives that have been lost, all the communities that have been shattered. So yeah, I'm in Brooklyn. I'm a human rights lawyer by training, and I've definitely, you know, felt called to the front lines of the protest to support my sisters and brothers on the front lines, and bear witness to and be a documentarian of, you know, what's really happening in the streets. So when I thought about what I could share today, it really comes from, you know, that spirit. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot today just about, you know, the pain and the exhaustion that Black people are feeling, dealing with anti-Blackness and the like. But for me, I wanted to center what I wanted to share today really in the possibility, you know, being out and seeing what is happening in the streets. And I know it's happening across the country and frankly, across the world. Just for me calls to, you know, the moment that we are in, the shock to the system, the status quo, you know, the twin public health epidemics facing our communities with COVID-19, and now sort of the realization or the awakening to what racial violence looks like has really presented to me a moment for us to think about how we take that shock to the system and really start to have conversations about radical racial reconciliation in this country. I really believe strongly that my spirit guides are telling me to listen to, you know, the idea that when we shift narrative, we can shift power. And so if you look at the conversations that are happening in the political space and how quickly they have shifted from things like universal basic income for all Americans to actually abolishing the police, not just as a slogan, but really looking at you know, what happened in Minneapolis with the school board and the parks, like actually pulling their contracts. It really feels like a moment for us to really change the narrative about what it is that we need to do to reconcile this country to Black people, and what we demand in our political spaces to set us up to plant good seeds to bear the fruit of the future that we know we need to in order for us to continue to exist as a country and as a human species. So that's just, you know, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and what I'm centering as we go through this collective experience together.
I love that, and I appreciate it. I think, you know, Malcolm X said the media is the most powerful entity on earth. I might be misquoting a bit, but, you know, you can make the guilty innocent and the innocent guilty just with the power of that narrative. And I feel what you're saying. Saki, another person in New York, one of our community members, but this is not the first rodeo for you. You've kind of seen some of this happen before. Maybe you can tell us about maybe what's different or what is the same from somebody that's experienced here.
So I think one of the things that's really different about now than when I came up, I shared with you all that I organized my first rally when I was 16, and that was around apartheid back in the 80s. And I think one of the things that's very different about now than later, which kind of plays on what you're saying about changing the narrative, is social media. And there's good parts about it and bad parts about it. One of the good parts about social media is that information is getting out damn near immediately, right? The bad part about that is information is getting out damn near immediately. But one of the other things it does do is it opens up conversation with a much wider audience as well than we had before. So that's definitely different. I think another thing that's extremely different now than before is there's a level of, for lack of a better word, compassion and empathy than we had before. And I think that's in part because we have this pandemic that's created a universal heaviness, a universal grief, but it's also made us all a lot more aware of what's happening. As soon as the state of Georgia opened up, we all found out about Ahmaud Arbery. And as soon as that happened, it was, you know, it was just a snowball from that. And then we heard about Breonna Taylor, and we heard about the man in the hotel room, again, social media, who blamed 2 Black men for kidnapping him, and the woman who killed her autistic child and blamed, you know, again, Black folks for doing that. And it's just snowballs. So the access to the internet and social media, along with the pandemic, has created kind of an empathy that I think didn't exist before, for, again, lack of a better word.
And what about, I want to talk to some of our West Coasters here. You know, you guys aren't in Minneapolis, you're not in New York City, but I know, just because I know you guys, that you feel this very strongly. Dave, how are you feeling about, you know, not being a Black person, but being a person of color and seeing what's going on here? And what's the difference, right, from your perspective?
Well, I'm a minority, but I'm privileged. Okay, I learned this week more than anything that I'm so privileged. And the more and more I see information, videos of what's happened to Black people, it really has, you know, got me thinking about how privileged I am that I don't have to go through that every single day. And to Saki's point, right now, everyone is watching. We got everyone's attention. For a long time, when things like this happen, they get swept under the rug because people like me only look at this on days like Martin Luther King Day and, you know, to bring awareness. But now that we're all seeing it equally, it has to, we have the attention of everyone. This is when we have to make these changes. We have to be able to take these Band-Aids. We put Band-Aids on these problems for too long. And now we have to somehow fundamentally, while everyone is paying attention, while everyone's listening, make these changes. And that's why I'm here. And this week has a lot of been about discovery for me too, about talking to my kids, my young kids. A lot of you don't know, but you know, when we came over from Vietnam, we moved right over to Washington when I was 1 year old, and we lived in projects in Seattle. And that was 90% Black people, you know? So like growing up, it was easy to vilify Black people because I'd look out my back door and you see the needles over here, you see the police sirens over here, and it's easy to point and go, oh, this is what this is. You know what I mean? Black people are bad. And this is how, this is to me, the fundamental way that we can fix this, because it happens, we are taught those things. But as for me, I lived there for 14 years. And as you started learning more, as you educate, think for yourself, you start realizing that, wow, we're a lot more the same. And then growing up in that environment, I was very lucky to grow up in that environment because I was able to understand that, to be able to talk, to be able to be friends, to be able to do those type of things. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity. A lot of people are in different situations where they don't have that influence, and we're so influenced by what it is, and it's usually in the early stages of your life when you hear certain things, when you know what's right and wrong. And right now it's just having these conversations with, you know, my two kids. She's 4 and 7 years old, and really not hiding it away from them, because that was easy to just go, okay, it's not affecting us, we're not going to talk about it. But now that they're able to do that, they're able to see that video in person. I don't know anyone ever without a pulse that isn't appalled by what happened to George Floyd. I don't know how it could affect that, but to be able to allow my children to look at that too and understand the reality of the world, you know, I've always wanted to protect them, you know what I mean? But at this moment, doing that is protecting them more than hiding this from them. So I always believe, and I've been talking about that around, is to kind of like, we need to start there with our children and how we talk to them and what we know for them is right or wrong.
I'm gonna jump in a little bit too with the Asian community, Dave. You know, you're talking to your children. I think this is also a really great opportunity to talk to our elders. I think COVID also brought a lot of anti-Asian sentiment, and you know, there is that feeling in the community, which I think can be used to illustrate what is happening in the Black communities that have been there for so long. One of the challenges, you know, that I have, and I don't know if you do, Dave, which is, you know, my parents are immigrants, we're immigrants, but I don't have the language to talk to them. And, you know, my Chinese is still like little kids Chinese. But to your point, Saki, there's so much social media now. There's a group called on Instagram, Grass, which is doing a lot of great translations. So these are conversations I'm having with my family. And at least there's Chinese lettering, at least there's Korean lettering, at least there's, you know, Vietnamese letterings on how to have these conversations with the elders. Because that is a huge frustration point, which is, you know, there's a lot of racism that Asians have. And to your point, Dave, it's a lot of being taught. And, you know, Asians are such an insular community that I think it's a really important time to.
White people are not the only racist people. Asian people are racist too. You know what I mean? I think we're kind of always kind of go, oh, it's like when we look at the image, it's like, okay, the white person has to be racist. No, there's Asian people that are racist also.
I want to be careful with that word racist a little bit. Just because, I mean, yes, let's get back to George Floyd. There was a Hmong cop standing complicit. There was a Middle Eastern man whose business called the police on him. But there is a level of damage that you all can't do to me, that the racist system, the systemic racism can do. So I also want to be careful with that, because it lays a whole lot more onus on a people who are also victims of racism, right? So when we talk about allyship, we talk about what you can do to help the system. I just think we need to be very clear not to lay the burden of the system on you, right? Because the system, part of like something that we talked about, part of anti-Blackness is maintaining Black people at the low end of the spectrum. We have to be the bottom of the caste. And the only way you can do that is creating a system where everybody else can look at us and see, oh, well, see, we came here and we got this store. What the hell are these people doing, right? And so you have to be careful when you say racism. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
You know, I just want to be careful that as we build allies, we talk about things the way that create true allyship, you know?
Saki, I appreciate you bringing that up, because, you know, I want to get Grizz and Nicole in here too, but before that, I want to turn to Jason, because I talked to him before about a word you said that's very powerful, which is anti-Black, right? And anti-Black is not a white to Black thing, right? It's all, you can be Black and be anti-Black, and sometimes you don't even notice it. And I want to understand that word a little bit more from you, Jason, and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think Saki really did a good job articulating and framing that issue in response to Lulu and David. But yeah, I mean, anti-Blackness is a necessary corollary to white supremacy. And so, you know, in this country, you know, our entire existence is built on the notion, the subjugation of and exploitation of Black labor, Black bodies, and let's not forget the theft of native land in order for for that labor, a place for that labor exploitation to happen. But it is now. It's in our institutions, right? It affects all of the institutions, you know, government, the media, and it's this notion that like our system works because there are, you know, those who whose identity is seen as, you know, the default, the core, and then there are other identities, racial identities, ethnic identities that are subjugated there too. And then you have sort of Black people. And this notion of anti-Blackness and how our country has exported anti-Blackness around the globe, really, you know, people can look at America, they can look at Black people in America and see a people that hold a nationality, right, American, for whom that country doesn't recognize as a full citizen. So Saki talked about apartheid in South Africa, where South Africans who were Black were legally treated as different kinds of citizens, as second-class citizens. We think, or we've told ourselves that we've done the work of fully realizing Black folks' identity as Americans, but we have not done that at all. Whether it's, you know, states that are still trying to take the vote away from Black people, you know, whether it's our police and law enforcement institutions brutalizing Black people, whether it's, you know, our corporate economic environment maintaining the exploitation of Black labor, even in the midst of a global pandemic, and sending so-called essential workers out. Anti-Blackness is the reason all of that can exist in a country where everybody has rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so I think one of the things that is resonating a lot with people is this notion that, like, you know, some of the limitations that folks, particularly people of color, non-Black people of color, experience in America is rooted in anti-Blackness. And some of the things that they do and perpetuate are anti-Black. So I think the notion that, like, we need to talk about racism and we need to talk about anti-Blackness as cousins, but as not twins, is something that I think we're trying to, that's language that I think is starting to be adopted in our cultural zeitgeist, in our political zeitgeist. And again, for me, if we can shift narrative, if we can shift language, then I think we have the opportunity to shift power. And I think that's why the term anti-Black and the concept of anti-Blackness is so important for us to talk about, to understand, to interrogate, and then to ultimately eradicate.
Yeah, and I mean, I think an underlying theme that has inevitably come up, and what just about everybody has said, is having those conversations. And this movement, because of social media and because of the pandemic, like Saki said, and because of a lot of things, people are having some of those conversations. And I'm curious, from your perspective, Grizzly, first, let us know where you're from and you know, how you're seeing things from your vantage point. But then also, you know, you've been literally a rebel for a long time, and how you're able to have those conversations with either your peers. You know, we all have close people to us, family members that have completely different viewpoints. So yeah, I turn it over to you.
Yes. Well, me growing up as a Afro Latino, I definitely experienced a lot of anti-Blackness in my community and even in my own family. And a lot of it is behavior that's kind of been learned from generations, stemming back from where we come from and just how the whole system has been put upon today. So in my experience, it's been a lot of uncomfortable conversations. However, one of the things I realized that in order to truly find a solution to these problems, that we need to speak about those issues directly with those peers and those who may not be aware, as Jason mentioned, those people who are expressing anti-Blackness but not even aware of that. Some people even in our own community. So addressing that and recognizing how does that look in order to truly be able to find a solution to it. Because if you're not recognizing that you are a part of the problem, then how are you able to help? So that's one of the things that I have witnessed during this time. There's a lot of people who've been honestly admitting that they do not know how to help, but they're interested in help. And it's important that we find ways to get them the resources and to speak to them and have those conversations with them to equip them with the language and the information so they can properly help.
I love that. And we will get into some resources and some ways that people can be a part of it. But, you know, we want people to be, you know, helpful towards where we're going. But there's a word that kills me because it's been so abused, as being an ally, right? And it makes me think of what happened in New York City with, I think it was Amy Cooper, right? Somebody that on the outside is an ally and is somebody that's kind of like down for it. She might even have a conversation about anti-Black to somebody, but then is still weaponizing her whiteness to a Black individual. And, you know, I want to turn it to you, Nicole. I don't know your background well enough to say, you know, how privileged or not you are, but as a white woman, I find that you are very aware of things, and almost to a degree that's almost unprecedented in a lot of ways. And so I really am curious, how does a woman in your position first gain that knowledge, but also be a contributor and helpful without being hurtful? I know that's asking a lot.
No, that's fine. I mean, as a white woman, I think that sets me, you know, on this platform of privilege, kind of above and beyond anything I've personally experienced. But I do personally come from really low-income white areas and have experienced a lot of anti-Blackness in that, and was raised in a lot of anti-Blackness that I didn't recognize as that for a long time. And being exposed to a lot of the rhetoric right now and internalizing a lot of it and seeing how I can personally do better and sharing that with the community I have access to as a business owner in Washington State has been really important for me. And I think it is important to give a personal voice to it and say, you know, these are the ways that I've seen in my experience I'm fucking up and I can do better. And offer that to other people to then personalize themselves and go forward. And kind of the most powerful tool I feel like I have access to is the business I own in Washington State. So as a person of immense privilege, looking at the systems of inequity that I'm participating in as a business owner and asking how I can help dismantle those, and asking how I can use this tool of a profit generating entity within the state to have a voice to ask them to change it. So a big thing we're working on is legislative action to allow for a pilot program for cooperative ownership, which would allow for communities of color and Black communities specifically to get involved in an equity capacity in the cannabis industry immediately, rather than the way the recreational cannabis industry was incepted and enacted in Washington State immediately excluded a lot of people who had any prior felonies and really didn't have any access to capital in a way that was needed to be eligible for a license. So trying to combat that legislatively seems like the best thing we can do right now.
I think what I really latch on to it is being aware of the privilege or the assets or the blessings that any individual has, and finding ways to use that for good. But also, I think something that gets overlooked in a lot of this conversation is that we all are consumers. Some of us are business owners, but we're all consumers. And we can make a difference in choosing where those dollars go. And I'm curious if any of you have a perspective on how do we leverage our consumerism to fight the power. I'm just going to call on Jason so everybody doesn't stay quiet.
Oh, I was actually going to say, you know, I always have an answer. I always have an answer. I think it's important because this actually really ties in closely to what you said about privilege and buying power, and how, you know, you keep the power by keeping people in low economic conditions, locked into those low economic conditions. And so you think you don't have the power, right? If you look at what's happening with the unrest, the civil unrest, with businesses burning, with communities falling to the ground, and we, again, on social media have been reaching out to people with privilege, people with dollars, right? And when I say people with privilege, I want to make it clear. I have no problem with privilege. I am a person of privilege. I went to college. I want to use my privilege as an asset, like you say. So privilege is an asset, 100%. But our dollars, like you said, Jacobi, are privilege. So when you get on social media and you say, hey, let's donate to this place and let's donate to that place, we have to do a bit more fact checking. Because right now in this crisis, our dollars are important, yes, to bailing out bodies from places where COVID is at high contamination rates. But we also have to bail out communities. We also have to bail out communities where businesses have burned down. So when you think about where your dollars are going to go in this time specifically, that's something to think about. Rebuilding, construction, rebuilding capital, rebuilding developments, rebuilding just structures in general. We don't need to rebuild another Target in Minneapolis, but we do need to rebuild the grocery stores that were torn down. We need to put money into things like that. And I think when you talk about your buying power, I'm real big on cooperative economics. When you talk about small business rebuilding, that's where your money and your power is in your community. The most tax dollars come from small businesses. The strengths of communities, if you look to the past, the strengths in our communities were our small business owners. So Nicole, you spoke about using your privilege in your small business to kind of leverage the legislature, right? Our small businesses were always able to do that. Our small business owners were always able to go to their aldermans and their mayors and their city councilors and do that. We need to rebuild that structure, right? When we talk about legislature in cannabis, for example, again, Nicole, we need to, at this point, when we have their ear, demand that we have small cannabis businesses in our neighborhoods, specifically these ones that had civil unrest, right? Where places burned down, let's put that money back in. And me as an individual, I'm donating money to a bailout fund, a lawyer fund. Why can't I be donating money into this is an investment into this small business fund? I think we need to think a little radically in that way when we talk about where we put our money. We can put our little bit of money as investors. No quotes, as investors into our small businesses, you know? I told you I got an answer everywhere.
I mean,
I can build
yeah.
a little bit on what Saki was saying, just because I think about, I like the way you frame this, Jacobi, is we're all consumers. Excuse me. Because we're also consumers of like government services. Interestingly, we're both funders of and consumers of. And so I don't want to miss this opportunity to have us think collectively also about what everybody on here lives in states that are highly taxed. Personally, sales, business tax, property tax, all of that money that you see coming out of those paychecks or coming out of those receipts and going to government should fund the things as consumers that communities need. So there's no reason why in New York City, which is about to pass our annual city budget, that there's a 40% reduction in the budget for social services, human services, and schools. Summer youth employment program has been cut, while the police have only seen a 0.2%, less than 0.5% reduction in the budget for policing. And this is the first time, I think, in 20 years that they've seen any kind of reduction at all. So when we talk about thinking about what we call for as consumers of government services, maybe nobody on this panel will need to access those services because of some of our privileges. But when I see those young folks out in the street, when I see those folks out in the street, screaming and really letting out that rage, of course it's about being brutalized by the police, but it's also about the lack of opportunities that are there, the lack of investment in community, the lack of repayment of debt that is owed to Black people in this country, while the people who are brutalizing and killing us get more weapons, get more guns, get more pensions, and get more qualified immunity to protect them from civil suit. So I think we also need to look at this moment look at ourselves, in this moment as consumers of government services, and really call for and demand what we think our money, our tax dollars should really go to be funding for our community.
I also want to speak on the different items and things that we consume currently, and how we can look into replacing those with from businesses of Black owned. One of the things that we need to kind of come up with is a community model that us and others can follow to kind of help them down that path. Because a lot of times we promote supporting Black businesses, but some of the times that can be hard. It's one thing to purchase a specific shirt or body care product, but what about some of the essential things that we use every day in our household that we kind of have to rely on, that it's hard for us to kind of replace that, or currently replace that with Black-owned items, because we may not be aware that they're out there. So we kind of have to create a model that allows us to do a better job of supporting Black businesses by finding those items that replace the current items that we purchase to support the corporation. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And don't let it be lost on me. Jason gave me shit 2 days ago that we still on Zoom. And I told him, you know, like it's hard to switch things over, right? Like you have to go through extra hoops to support other businesses. And, but it's important, right? Like, trust me, Lulu and I have already talked about it, and it's, you know, something that's important to us. And there was an interesting quote I heard many years ago, and I looked it up, and this was the closest I could find, but the Asian community is amazing at keeping money in their community, like you're alluding to, Grizzly. This number says $1 in the Asian community lasts 28 days, which is wild. And as you know, the Jewish community is also historically very good at this. This number says 19 days. But in the Black community, it is about 6 hours, which means almost every dollar we get, we are instantly giving it back to somebody else. And if it's not making those rounds throughout our community, it's not helping build us up. And so, you know, what Jason was saying is that we are also consumers of government services. I mean, we all drive on the same streets, you know, at the most basic level. We're walking on those sidewalks. What I really want to understand, though, is how do we, this is a little biased, but defund things that we don't think are important. And that might be kind of a setup for one of you to answer something that I think should be defunded. But how do we go about making sure that that money goes to where we think is important to go?
You know, Jacobi, that wasn't always that way, though. The dollar in our communities didn't always leave in 6 hours. And part of that is on what I said before, we had small businesses. And when you have small businesses, you have more political power, right? Right now, we might not still have those businesses, but we have voices and we have solidarity. And this solidarity we have is proving muscle with our legislators to get things unfunded, like you said. And I didn't double check this before, but I did mention before that LA Mayor Garcetti has because of these, the civil unrest, he's finding from somewhere $250 million to put back into communities of color for education. And he's taking some of that money, as I understand it, from the police department, right? We talk about a good portion of funding from the police department comes from the war on drugs. It comes to fund the war on drugs. And I believe everybody in here is in cannabis. One of the largest consumed illicit drugs is considered marijuana. Using this momentum we have right now and re-regulating marijuana as a medicine, or re-regulating marijuana so that a good chunk of that money from asset forfeiture, from funding, from stats of we had to arrest X amount of people for consumption, for black market dealings. It's a good way to get money from a people who are pretty much, at this point, they're radicalizing the masses. But for the most part, previously, they've been brutalizing the masses, you know? So we have a lot of momentum right now because of social media, because of these actions, because of these, I know you don't like the word, Jacobi, but because of these allies that we have a lot more power to make that voice heard about what we don't want funded right now.
I think we also have a unique moment with COVID. We have these rapt audiences that are glued to social media waiting for some action they can take. So finding out within your local municipality the specific bill information, the specific ballot initiative information that you can help disseminate to educate your specific community on what the next action is. Because I found, as you know, we've been trying to write these legislative bills, people don't know how to support them. People don't understand how long and boring of a process it is, and how many different times you have to show up to support it to make sure it makes its way through. Bills just disappear all the time. So really trying to get people, while you have their attention, to participate in every needed step.
I think that's a perfect segue into actually making this conversation actionable. I appreciate so much all of your perspectives and your experience and your candor and your raw emotions. But the operations person inside of me could never let a meeting end without next steps, right? So we have people that are paying attention here that will watch this on YouTube later, that are all over the country, that are of all different ethnicities, that have different amounts of cash, that have different amounts of time. What are ways that we think that people can take advantage of this moment and be a part of seeing some element of radical change?
Saki has an answer for sure.
I think Grizzly's ready too. Come on, David. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I think to me, it's about affecting the people that are immediately in your circle right now. I think being quiet right now, which is very convenient to do and which we're also used to doing, is very easy. But the tough part, and kind of part of the sad part too, is as I'm having these conversations, as I'm now talking about anti-Blackness, it's you start to see people's, the emotions come out and some true colors. So to me, it's just not about being quiet. It's about affecting the group around you. It's about looking at your children and not only, saying that I'm not, the word racist, anti-Black, but I am against it completely. And that's, what we can affect right now in our immediate circle. If we do that, generationally, perhaps we can see just the whole mindset change and it not be the norm. And I'm just, for me, I'm just going to start there and start speaking within my circles, because that's where I have a lot of influence, and speaking up just, in general. You know what I mean? I look at LinkedIn and it's like I could post about anything else, but if I post about Black Lives Matter, it becomes very quiet, but you got to continue to put that in your face. If it's uncomfortable, then you know what? We know it's working. So that's what we're just going to continue to do on my part.
One of the things that I say that we need to create a de-invest model for our community, because we talk about defunding the police. So we need to actually break down how would that look in order for us to truly understand the ways in which we can do so. So creating a model which have supporting data that shows how we can shift priority into funding the police and shift that into social services, as we mentioned, as well as to shift it into mental health care, which is something that we definitely need in our community now more than ever. So I feel like we need to come up with things such as that shows the proof and supports the data that allows us to take the steps forward in order to do so. Another thing that I believe is that we also need to understand our strengths and weaknesses and understand the value that each of us hold and work towards that. So everyone may not be in a position to protest. Everyone may not be in position to do this or that, but understand what you can do and focus on that to play your part, as opposed to trying to do things that you may not be able to do or stressing over that. So understanding your strength that you can do and where your weaknesses are, reach out to someone else. And that's why I feel the allyship comes into play. Or not so much understanding what it means to be an ally.
Jason, giving you credit for this. He had a word I like better, is co-conspirator. that resonates with me. But what I like about what the first two ideas were is actually something that we say in the cannabis world all the time, is don't try to do something that you don't have a gift for. Some people don't have time or the luxury to be able to walk on the streets all day or during this set period of time because they have a commitment. But doing what you can to do, make a difference, whether it's in your small little community, maybe you're a strategic thinker and can come up with some of these ideas that Grizzly's talking about. Jason, I know you got more ideas.
For sure. I think, I'm specifically talking to the white people. Please take the time to educate yourself on these issues, the history. Someone, a white woman, is put together like a Google Doc that's like a resource guide that's like making its way around social media that I think is just incredibly strong. Like, become a student of this stuff because I think in order, just to David's point, like, in order for you to figure out how to meaningfully incorporate anti-racist practices into your life, you need to understand the history and also understand like the systems and the structure and the language, so that we don't find ourselves falling into the habit of asking Black people what we should do or what I can do, because that's just more labor and more trauma on us. Like, Black people are not going to solve white supremacy. We don't have the power to do it in this country. And so I really feel encouraged when I see my friends who are not Black, particularly my friends who are white, start to take the time to really dig into the history and the material and develop understanding. I'm also going to say, if you are able, please go out and protest. Please go out and take other people from your community. And I say that because right now, whether it's the president, whether it's our governor here in New York, our mayor in New York City, and in many places across the country, these folks are doing everything they can to suppress this dissent because they see that this level of dissent, sustained dissent, is actually shifting the ground underneath their power that they've never experienced before. It's sending earthquakes into our state capitals, it's sending earthquakes into our city halls, and it's sending earthquakes into the White House, if you can even call it that, with that terrorist in it anymore. So when they don't feel that pressure anymore, when that heat turns down, then those conversations are going to change. And those conversations can't change right now. We need to keep making them feel like we are going to shut shit down every day. And you can do that peacefully, and you can do that and keep your safety protected. But if you can, please go out there, because it's day 9 for me. And you can probably hear I'm losing my voice. I got wounds. I've been pepper sprayed, tear gas, rubber bulleted, assaulted with police bikes. And I would be lying to you if I say I'm not just a little bit tired. And I would love to just Netflix and chill tonight, but I'm not going to do that until I know that there's enough energy that when the folks this week get tired, it's going to be another couple thousand folks next week. And when they get tired, it's going to be another couple thousand folks. They are doing that. And so we have to respond in kind. And what better way to create community than joining with your family members or your neighbors who don't believe and taking them down there, even if it's for an hour, and letting that voice be heard, but also learning. I would just say to the non-Black folks, don't gentrify the protest. If it's your first time protesting, if you don't know what to do, just look for a Black woman, follow her directions, and you'll generally be okay.
That's
another thing I would like to add to that.
I'm sorry, Grizzly, go on.
No, I just wanted to mention, it's important that we protest. Yes, I agree with you, Jeffrey. Thank you for doing so. And one thing I want to add is the fact that when we out there protesting, to make sure that we have a plan of action as well as the plan of emergency, because it's important during these times that we are out there prepared for when shit hits the fan. And we have options to reach out to when that happens. So I just wanted us to be mindful of those two things to make sure we go out there with a purpose and a plan and not just going out there recklessly. And as well, in addition to that, to make sure we have a plan of emergency when things go left.
So I just wanted to add on everyone's point. The first David to something that David said about radicalizing the people around you and making sure that we have information. There are a lot of anti-racist movements out. There's a lot of, I know that there's a Google Doc, there's a lot of memes with books and stuff to read. I wanted to share a few of the white anti-racist people who are great specifically for white people. Jane Elliott, old white lady, white hair. She has something on, she's a lot of work, but for people who don't have time or capacity to read, there's something called A Class Divided. It was done back in 1985 on Frontline. Tim Wise, I'm sure you've seen him 8 million times on Fox News, MSNBC. He's another anti-racism activist, several books. Peggy McIntosh is an essayist. So again, if you don't have the capacity to read these long ass books, she wrote White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Backpack as her most favorite. Mitch Landrieu, who's not really an anti-racism advocate, but he's the former mayor of New Orleans, and he wrote a book called In the Shadow of Statues, A White Southerner Confronts History, which was the pulling down of the racist statues throughout New Orleans. And then, of course, my children read this book, God, when they were 10 and 11 and 12 in their homeschooling collaborative. It's called A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Now, I also say for people who are Asian and Latino, there are so many, and Indians, there are so many cross movements that we have done throughout this country that is important for us and you to read and recognize. There is the Longshoreman movement that Filipinos did in Seattle, Washington. My actually Japanese American stepfather was part of that. We have the Young Lords who were in line with the Black Panther Party, people who took to the streets again with guns. Keep in mind, gun laws changed because of the radicalization of Latin people, Mexicanos, Black people, specifically in California, Northern California, Southern California, here in New York. Gun laws changed because they took to the streets with weaponry. And see, old lady brain, the other one escaped me. But there are lots of movements. Oh, Indians, we have AIM, American Indian Movement. Again, this is something I want to bring up in this call. Minneapolis, many fires happened. One of the great losses that happened is the American Indian Movement offices in Minneapolis, which held the archives of the entire movement for that state, was burned to the ground. They have no more archives of that movement. So that segs to the next point I want to make. Some of us cannot march. Some of us cannot put our bodies on the line. Some of us can clean up our neighborhoods. Some of us can protect our neighborhoods. There is a lot talking about damage that's happening to our neighborhoods, goods being, what's a good way to put it? Goods being
reclaimed.
Goods being reclaimed. I think it's important that people in our neighborhood reach out and hey, this is a Black-owned business, this is a community business, we're here for you. You need to be at your business sometimes, and people from your community need to be there and make sure your place is safe. Another thing that happened in Minneapolis is when there was one grocery store left, one in the neighborhood. People in the neighborhood stood outside and protected it. They're like, this is our resource and you're not gonna close it. We've lost too much, right? So we need to take that onus on ourselves. And if you want to help, but you can't march, you can't risk getting arrested, you can't risk COVID, you can't risk, because remember, all protesting is dangerous. You're right, Grizzly, we do need to have a plan, because peaceful or not, all protesting is not peaceful. You're stirring the pot. So there's always the potential for arrest. You have to have a plan. So if you can't risk any of that, you can stay in your neighborhoods and protect your spaces with each other. That's it. That's all I got.
You can also invest yourself.
Okay, I thought about, yeah, go for it.
It's just
Quickly, 30 seconds.
You can invest yourself into pre-existing community organizations as well. Food banks, Meals on Wheels, places that still really need bodies and need, you know, action to be taken right now, especially with COVID happening. These communities still are really underserved. So,
And then we will also be sending out in our follow-up email petitions, donations and fundraisers, additional resources for web pages and social media, Black-owned businesses. So there's a lot of information out there, and participate in the way that you can safely. I also want to bring out, for the cannabis community, a database of people of color owned businesses created by Almost Consulting and CANNACLUSIVE called Inclusive Base. So please add yourself and also work with these businesses. It's a really beautiful thing that these ladies have done. And yeah, we'll be sending all these resources. Thank you for your time.
Once again, thank you all the panelists. I love each and every one of you guys and appreciate you so much. Thank you for everybody that joined. You know, together we can do this. I thought about cutting you off like 10 times, Saki, but all that shit was important, so we had to let it run. With all that said, thank you guys. DJ O, take us home.
Thank you.
All right.